When I was in college, I had a friend suggest that conservative Christians are basically modern-day Pharisees. If you're a conservative Christian, this might strike you as an odd or obviously wrong belief. That's how it hit me when I was first confronted with this accusation. But after a bit of reflection, I can see how a more liberal-minded Christian could easily conclude that conservative Christians are today's Pharisees. What's a Pharisee? Well, back in the time of Jesus, the Pharisees were a Jewish sect who ended up going against the will of God because they were obsessed with laws and strictness. In their passion for proper beliefs and behavior, they were prideful. They didn't care about the oppressed or the marginalized, and they burdened other people with all these laws about how to live their life. In the New Testament, Jesus had some strong words against the Pharisees. He said that they tie up heavy, cumbersome loads and put them on other people's shoulders. He said, "You shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in people's faces." He said, "You give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness." It's really not that hard for someone to hear conservative Christianity in that. For instance, to talk about sin, is that tying up heavy burdens on people? To say that there's only one way to God, is that shutting the kingdom of heaven in people's faces? To focus on proper theology and biblical interpretation, to fight against heresies and proselytize or evangelize to others, is that neglecting weightier matters of the law, like just loving others and accepting them for who they are? I have seen many conservative individuals guilty of these accusations from Jesus. I've seen many conservatives aware of these temptations to become legalistic Pharisees, and they have worked hard to overcome these temptations. I've seen that in myself when I'm not careful. Others have the Pharisee mindset, but they are not aware or they don't care, and they go about living their lives obsessed with religious protocol rather than God. Some of them even think that they are truly pious for doing so. But I would argue that this problem is not germane to conservative theology, nor would I say that conservative Christianity was ever meant to be this way. Consider this first accusation from Jesus. They tie up heavy, cumbersome loads and put them on other people's shoulders. Conservative theology necessarily cares deeply about instructing godly behavior, as did the Pharisees in the time of Jesus. But Jesus' statement of the Pharisees here is not that they need to lighten up and let people live their life. And look at this statement in context. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat, so you must be careful to do everything they tell you, but do not do what they do. For they do not practice what they preach. They tie up heavy, cumbersome loads and put them on other people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. Here, the problem is not the fact that they instruct proper living, but that they are hypocrites, and their hypocrisy caused their teaching to go unchecked. A conservative might be a hypocrite, but they don't have to be, nor should they. Jesus had lots of words against hypocrisy, and anyone who cares about the Bible like a conservative does ought to care about that. The commands of God were likewise never intended to be a burden. 1 John 5:3 says that God's commands are not burdensome. When Jesus said, "You shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in people's faces," we might think that Jesus is affirming that there are many different ways to God, or even that all people are basically good and will all go to heaven. Conservative theology necessarily affirms that the only way to God is through Jesus, and those who reject Jesus will not make it to heaven. But whatever Jesus meant against the Pharisees here cannot possibly mean that everyone is saved and there is no danger of hell. A little later in the same speech, Jesus said to them, "How will you escape being condemned to hell?" It's clear by Jesus' own words against the Pharisees that there is a real danger of sin and rejection of God that needs correction. Again, in just a little more context, you shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You yourselves do not enter, nor will you let those enter who are trying to. What about the third accusation I mentioned? You give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. This, I think, is where conservatives tend to be most guilty, actually. So many of them are concerned about sin and evangelism and biblical truth at the expense of standing for justice, showing acts of mercy, and the like. But once again, that is not necessary for conservative theology, nor should it be. And once again, look at the larger context of this rebuke by Jesus. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give 1/10 of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. Jesus is saying, don't neglect God's good teachings over other teachings. I have found that liberal Christianity often upholds values like love and kindness at the neglect of biblical truth. For them, to love someone is often seen as the same as accepting their beliefs and lifestyles. But some beliefs and some lifestyles are legitimately harmful to their life or dangerous for their soul. Wouldn't you think those matters which touch on eternal consequence would be the weightiest of them all? Looking at the life of Jesus, we see that he was both compassionate towards others and firm in his teachings. He was both kind to the sinner and strong on repentance. John 1:14 said that Jesus came both full of grace and truth. It wasn't 50-50, it wasn't a compromise. We should likewise be mindful of living our life in a way that exemplifies the model of Jesus. Next week, I want to share with you a very important academic work which argues that the New Testament authors talked about the deity of Jesus in a way that never compromised their firmly held belief in monotheism. This is a totally different approach than trying to save monotheism by fitting Jesus in there, which was your typical approach by the early church fathers. If you don't know what I'm talking about, stick around. If you do know what I'm talking about, then you're probably intrigued as I was, so stick around. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.